I never imagined I'd be sleeping in my car at 42, my entire life packed into garbage bags in the trunk. 3 months after Daniel convinced the judge I was an unstable influence and took everything, our home, our savings, even custody of our daughter Lily, I was washing my face in a gas station bathroom when a man in an expensive suit approached me. "Excuse me, are you Rebecca Mitchell?" When I nodded, he handed me a business card. "I'm James Harrington, attorney. Eleanor Blackwood passed away last month. You've inherited $47 million. The name meant nothing to me. If you're joining this story from somewhere around the world, I'd love to know where you're watching from. The journey I'm about to share changed my understanding of justice and family karma completely. If this resonates with you already, please consider subscribing to hear more stories about life's unexpected turning points. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, before my world fell apart. I used to have a life most people would envy. Before I became Rebecca Caldwell, I was Rebecca Mitchell, owner of Mitchell Interiors, a boutique design firm catering to Chicago's elite. I had built my business from nothing over 7 years, working my way up from an assistant at a large firm to striking out on my own. My portfolio included renovations for lakefront condos, historic brownstones, and even a few celebrity vacation homes. My schedule was booked 6 months in advance, and I had just been featured in Architectural Digest when I met Daniel. The Chicago Children's Hospital annual gala wasn't the kind of event I normally attended, but one of my clients had invited me as thanks for transforming their penthouse. I wore a midnight blue gown I could barely afford, feeling somewhat out of place among the city's wealthiest families. Daniel Caldwell approached me during the silent auction, champagne in hand, with that confident smile that seemed to light up his entire face. "You look too interesting to be a society regular," he said. "I'm Daniel Caldwell." The Caldwell name was everywhere in Chicago, on buildings, university halls, and hospital wings. The family's real estate empire dated back 3 generations, and Daniel was the heir apparent, handling the development side of Caldwell Properties while his father managed the old money relationships. Our whirlwind romance was the stuff of fairy tales. Within 6 months, we were engaged. My friends warned me it was too fast, but I was completely captivated by Daniel's world. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my creativity and independence. The small voice in my head that questioned whether someone from his background could truly respect someone who had worked for everything was silenced by his constant reassurances. "Your success is what made me notice you," he told me. "You're not like the women I usually meet. You've built something real." When we married at the Caldwell estate in Lake Forest, surrounded by Chicago's elite and a few of my overwhelmed college friends, I was certain I'd found my happy ending. At the reception, Daniel's father Howard pulled me aside. "Welcome to the family, Rebecca. The Caldwells take care of their own." I didn't realize then that taking care meant something very different to them than it did to me. Shortly after our honeymoon, Daniel suggested I sell my business. Caldwell Properties was launching a high-end residential division, and he wanted me to head the interior design team. The salary he offered was triple what I earned on my own. "Think about it," he said. "No more hustling for clients, no more chasing invoices. Plus, we want to start a family soon. This way, you can scale back when the time comes." It made perfect sense. I sold Mitchell Interiors to my assistant, Katie, for a fraction of its worth as a friend price, and joined the Caldwell corporate family. For a while, it was everything I'd hoped for. I had creative control, resources beyond anything I'd worked with before, and the Caldwell name opened doors that had previously been closed to me. When I became pregnant with Lily, Daniel was ecstatic. His father slapped him on the back at the announcement dinner. "Continuing the Caldwell legacy," Howard said proudly. "That's what it's all about." After Lily's birth, my role at Caldwell Properties gradually diminished. Daniel suggested I take a year off, then 2. "We don't need the money," he pointed out whenever I mentioned returning. "Lily needs you at home. We can always hire designers." I didn't notice how my world was shrinking until it was too late. Our joint accounts became managed by Daniel's financial team. My occasional freelance design work was discouraged because it reflected on the Caldwell name. My college friends stopped calling after too many canceled plans. Even my parents, who had moved to Arizona for retirement, sensed the distance during their increasingly rare visits. "You seem different," my mother said during her last trip, watching me ask Daniel's permission before committing to dinner plans. "I'm just busy with Lily and supporting Daniel," I explained, not meeting her eyes. The signs were there if I'd been willing to see them. Daniel checking my phone casually while I was bathing Lily. The household staff reporting my comings and goings. The increasing criticism of my parenting choices, my appearance, my opinions. The way money for household expenses became a monthly allowance I had to account for. The unexplained late nights and weekend emergencies at the office. When Lily started kindergarten, I suggested returning to work part-time. Daniel dismissed the idea immediately. "We agreed you'd be there for Lily. Besides, what would you do? Your old contacts have all moved on." That night, I realized how completely I'd surrendered my independence. My design credentials had lapsed. My professional network had dissolved. My resume had an 8-year gap. I'd become exactly what the Caldwells wanted, a perfectly groomed corporate wife and mother, an accessory to Daniel's success story. The breaking point came during a company retreat in Aspen. I wasn't feeling well and stayed behind in our suite while Daniel attended a dinner. When his phone kept buzzing with notifications, I glanced at the screen, something I normally wouldn't do. What I saw shattered the carefully constructed illusion of our perfect life. A series of explicit texts from Veronica Assistant filled the screen. As I scrolled back through months of messages, I discovered that Daniel had been having an affair with his 26-year-old assistant for over a year. There were hotel receipts, intimate photos, and cruel jokes about me being clueless. When he returned to the suite, I confronted him, phone in hand. I expected denial, perhaps remorse. What I got was rage. "You had no right to go through my phone," he snarled, grabbing it from my hand with enough force to leave marks on my wrist. "This is why I can't stand being around you anymore. You're suffocating me." For the first time, I saw the mask slip completely. The charming, supportive husband vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger. When he stepped toward me, fist clenched, I flinched back against the wall. He didn't hit me, but the look in his eyes told me he had considered it. "You've got a pretty good life, Rebecca," he said, his voice suddenly calm. "Don't ruin it by making a big deal about this. Veronica is just an outlet. You're my wife. Act like it and we won't have a problem." That night, lying awake in the hotel room's second bedroom, I made my decision. As soon as we returned to Chicago, I would file for divorce. After nearly a decade of surrendering my power inch by inch, I was finally ready to reclaim it. I had no idea what I was up against. The morning after we returned from Aspen, I withdrew $5,000 from our joint account, the maximum ATM limit, and made an appointment with a divorce attorney. I found Patricia Winters through a Google search for Affordable Divorce Lawyer Chicago and met her in a small office above a deli in Lincoln Park, worlds away from the gleaming downtown towers where Daniel conducted business. "I need to file for divorce," I told her, explaining the situation as calmly as I could. "I don't want to take him for everything. I just need enough to start over with my daughter." Patricia's expression grew increasingly concerned as I detailed my circumstances. "Mrs. Caldwell, I have to be honest with you. You're up against significant resources. The Caldwells don't lose, and they don't settle unless it's on their terms. Do you have any family or friends who could help with legal fees? This could get expensive." I thought about my parents' modest retirement savings, my few remaining friends, all of whom had families and mortgages of their own. "I have the $5,000 I withdrew today, and whatever else I can get before he freezes the accounts, which he will as soon as he's served." When I returned home, Lily was at a playdate, and Daniel was waiting in his home office, an imposing space designed to intimidate. Edward Barnes, senior partner at Chicago's most prestigious law firm, sat beside him. "Rebecca," Daniel said coldly. "Edward is here to discuss the terms of our separation, which he'll draw up immediately." I know you've been to see a lawyer. My blood ran cold. I had paid Patricia in cash specifically to avoid creating a paper trail. Someone had followed me. The nanny works for me, Daniel said, reading my expression. Now, let's be reasonable. You'll get a fair settlement if you don't contest anything. Full custody remains with me, of course. Lily needs stability. Full custody? I whispered. She's my daughter. And she's a Caldwell, Daniel replied. She stays with the family that can provide for her properly. Your background and mental state would make custody impossible anyway. My mental state? I echoed, genuinely confused. Edward Barnes cleared his throat. Mrs. Caldwell, we have documented evidence of your erratic behavior, emotional instability, and recent attempts to misappropriate family funds. Should you choose to contest Mr. Caldwell's generous terms, we would be forced to present this evidence in court. The evidence was fabricated, of course. The erratic behavior was my growing independence as Lily entered school. The emotional instability was my reaction to discovering Daniel's affair. The misappropriation was my $5,000 withdrawal from accounts that held millions. I left the house that day with a suitcase of clothes and my personal items. Daniel had already arranged for Lily to stay with his parents, telling her mommy needed special rest for a while. I checked into an extended stay hotel and called Patricia immediately. They're going to destroy me, I told her, my voice breaking. They're claiming I'm unstable. They've already taken Lily. What followed was 18 months of legal hell. Daniel's legal team filed motion after motion, each requiring a response, each draining my limited resources. They deposed everyone who had ever known me, building a case that I was an unreliable, emotionally unstable gold digger who had targeted Daniel from the beginning. The most devastating betrayal came from Melissa Parker, my closest friend from the few I had maintained. We had met in college and despite living in different cities, had remained close. She was Lily's godmother, someone I trusted implicitly. In her deposition, Melissa claimed she had serious concerns about my parenting. She described incidents, entirely fabricated, of me drinking heavily around Lily, making impulsive decisions, and expressing resentment toward motherhood. When I confronted her outside the deposition room, her eyes couldn't meet mine. I'm sorry, Rebecca. Eric's construction company just got the Caldwell Center renovation contract. We need it, the twins' college funds, the mortgage. Daniel made it clear what would happen if I didn't help. One by one, the people I thought I could count on were either bought off or scared away. Katie, who had purchased my business, suddenly remembered that I had been unreliable and disorganized. Former clients developed amnesia about my professionalism. Even my daughter's kindergarten teacher testified that I seemed distracted during pickup, though she admitted under cross-examination that Daniel rarely participated in school activities. By the time we reached the final hearing, I had exhausted my savings and maxed out 3 credit cards to pay Patricia, who had reduced her fees out of what seemed like pity. I had moved from the extended stay hotel to a studio apartment in a neighborhood I would never have visited in my previous life. Judge Gordon presided over the final custody hearing. From the moment he entered the courtroom, his bias was evident. He addressed Daniel's attorney as counselor and Patricia as Miss Winters. He sustained nearly every objection from Daniel's side while overruling most of Patricia's. When I took the stand, his skepticism was palpable. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, emphasizing the name as if reminding me it wasn't truly mine, given your limited experience as a primary breadwinner and the testimony regarding your emotional state, how do you propose to provide a stable environment for your daughter? I've been interviewing for design positions, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I built a successful business before my marriage. I can do it again. Lily has been my primary focus since she was born. I've been her daily caregiver for 8 years. Judge Gordon's ruling came down like a hammer. Daniel received primary physical custody of Lily. I was granted supervised visitation twice a month at the family center, pending a psychological evaluation. The financial settlement, after legal fees, left me with barely enough to cover 3 months' rent on my studio apartment. As we left the courthouse, Daniel caught up with me on the steps, away from the cameras and reporters who covered anything involving the Caldwell name. "You should have just accepted my terms," he said quietly, his perfect smile never reaching his eyes. "Now you have nothing. If you'd been reasonable, you could have had a comfortable life. This outcome is entirely your fault." I watched him walk to the waiting black SUV where his parents sat with Lily, my daughter's small face pressed against the window. She raised her hand in a tiny wave before they drove away. I stood on those courthouse steps, understanding for the first time what it meant to lose everything. The financial settlement from my divorce, $28,000 after Patricia's discounted legal fees, seemed like it might sustain me until I could rebuild. I was wrong. Chicago's design world had effectively blacklisted me. At first, I didn't understand why every promising interview ended with a vague "we've decided to go in another direction" email. Then Katie, my former assistant who had purchased my business, called me late one night after too many glasses of wine. "I shouldn't be telling you this, but Daniel has been calling everyone in the industry. He's telling them you had a breakdown, that you're unstable and litigious. He's implying that anyone who hires you will lose Caldwell business." "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I can't even hire you as a consultant. We just got the Caldwell Riverfront project." I expanded my search beyond design, applying for retail jobs, administrative positions, anything that might pay the bills. My resume, with its 8-year gap and lack of recent references, rarely got me past the initial screening. When it did, my explanation for the employment gap, I was raising my daughter and supporting my husband's career, was met with thinly veiled skepticism. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I took a job as a barista at a coffee shop far from the downtown areas the Caldwells frequented. The hourly wage plus tips barely covered my rent, but it was something. I was learning the rhythm of the espresso machine when I looked up to see Howard Caldwell, Daniel's father, at the counter. "I heard you were working here," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive Caldwell certainty. "Daniel doesn't know I've come. I wanted to see for myself." He left a $100 bill in the tip jar. The next day, the coffee shop owner told me they were restructuring the schedule and my services were no longer needed. By month 4, I was interviewing for positions in the suburbs, willing to commute hours each day for steady employment. By month 5, I had maxed out my credit cards and was selling my designer clothes on consignment to cover groceries. By month 6, I couldn't make rent. My landlord, a corporation that owned half the buildings in the neighborhood, was unsympathetic. The eviction notice came 3 days after my rent was due, and I had 2 weeks to vacate. I called everyone I knew, but doors that had once been open were now firmly closed. The Caldwell influence ran deep in Chicago. On a cold October morning, I loaded my remaining possessions, 2 suitcases of clothes, a box of photos and keepsakes, Lily's baby blanket I'd managed to take during the divorce, into my 12-year-old Honda Civic. I had $342 in my checking account, enough for maybe 2 weeks of motel rooms if I was extremely careful. The Lakeside Motel charged $59 per night, a rate that dropped to $49 if you stayed for a week. I rationed my funds carefully, eating ramen noodles heated in the room's microwave and applying for jobs at every business within walking distance. When my motel funds ran out, I still had the car. The first night in my Honda was terrifying. I parked in a Walmart lot where other cars seemed to stay overnight, reclining the driver's seat as far as it would go and covering myself with my winter coat. Every sound, shopping carts, car doors, voices, jolted me awake. I kept the doors locked, keys ready to start the engine if needed. By the 3rd night, I had developed a system. I would park in a different location each night: Walmart, hospital parking garages, 24-hour grocery stores. I joined a budget gym for $10 a month primarily for shower access. I stored my professional clothes, the few I hadn't sold, in the trunk, changing in the gym locker room before interviews. I kept my phone charged using the car charger, sparingly, to preserve my battery. The invisibility of homelessness was perhaps the most jarring aspect of my new reality. People looked through me, past me, anywhere but at me. The baristas at coffee shops where I would buy the cheapest drink to secure a few hours of warmth and Wi-Fi became experts at forgetting my face, despite seeing me daily. When I did catch someone's eye, a mother with children, a businessman in a suit, I recognized the fear. Not of me, but of what I represented, the possibility that the distance between their life and mine might be shorter than they wanted to believe. The supervised visits with Lily at the family center were both the highlight and the most painful part of my new existence. Every other Saturday, I would wake early to shower at the gym, put on my last good outfit, and arrive at the center an hour early, rehearsing positive stories about my new apartment and promising job prospects. I became adept at answering Lily's innocent questions. "When can I see your new place, Mommy?" "Soon, sweetheart. It's just not quite ready for visitors yet. Daddy says you're having a hard time." "Are you sick?" "No, honey. Sometimes grown-ups have challenges, but I'm working through them." For those 2 hours twice a month, I performed the role of functional mother, while a family center supervisor took notes on our interaction. I read books to Lily, helped with her homework, and listened to stories about her life, piano lessons, her new nanny Margot, playdates with the daughters of Daniel's business associates. I smiled until my face ached, hiding the reality that after our visits, I would be sleeping in a car while she returned to her bedroom in the Caldwell mansion. As Chicago's winter approached, car living became increasingly dangerous. The temperature dropped below freezing, and even running the engine occasionally for heat risked using precious gas I couldn't afford to replace. I began spending my days in public libraries and my evenings in 24-hour diners, ordering the cheapest menu item to justify my presence until closing time, then sleeping in the car for the fewest hours possible. Depression settled over me like another layer of cold. I began to question everything: my decision to confront Daniel about the affair, my refusal to accept his initial settlement offer, even my worth as a human being. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court had diagnosed me with adjustment disorder with depressed mood, a label that felt absurdly clinical for the catastrophic collapse of my life. On particularly dark nights, curled in the back seat of my Honda with winter closing in, I contemplated ending the struggle. What kept me going was Lily, not just the hope of regaining custody, which seemed increasingly unlikely, but the determination that she would know I had never willingly abandoned her. 3 months into homelessness, I developed a persistent cough that wouldn't respond to over-the-counter medicine. The combination of cold, poor nutrition, and chronic stress had weakened my immune system. I couldn't afford a doctor, but when I began coughing up blood, I finally went to an emergency room. The diagnosis was pneumonia. The treatment was antibiotics I couldn't afford, rest in a warm environment I didn't have, and follow-up care that was impossible. I was washing my face in the bathroom of a Shell station, trying to manage my fever with cold water, when a man in an expensive suit approached me in the convenience store area. I tensed, prepared for another humiliation, perhaps being asked to leave for loitering. Instead, he called me by name. "Excuse me, are you Rebecca Mitchell? I wanted to tell you all what it feels like to reach your absolute lowest point, then have a complete stranger speak your maiden name, a name that felt like it belonged to another life entirely." In my next segment, I'll share what happened when this mysterious man handed me his business card, and how a name I'd never heard before would change everything. I'm curious though, have you ever had a moment when your life changed direction in an instant? If you're finding value in my story, please support the channel with a like and subscribe to hear how this journey unfolds. "Excuse me, are you Rebecca Mitchell?" the man repeated, standing too close for comfort in the fluorescent glare of the gas station. I stepped back instinctively, clutching my purse, which contained exactly $27.43 and an almost empty bottle of generic cough medicine. Was he a process server? One of Daniel's private investigators? Another person hired to ensure my continued downward spiral? Who's asking? My voice came out hoarse from the pneumonia. He extended a business card between 2 manicured fingers. "James Harrington, of Harrington, Webb and Associates. I've been looking for you for some time, Ms. Mitchell." Your current situation made you somewhat difficult to locate. I took the card. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed lettering, a downtown address in one of Chicago's most prestigious office buildings. It looked legitimate, but I'd learned to be suspicious. What is this about? I asked, suppressing a cough. I'd prefer to discuss it somewhere more appropriate, he said, glancing around the gas station convenience store. My car is outside. I can take you to my office, or if you'd prefer, we could meet at a cafe. I'm not going anywhere with a stranger who approached me at a gas station, I said flatly. A flicker of understanding crossed his face. Of course. How about the Starbucks across the street? You can drive yourself, verify my credentials online first if you wish. I'll wait. 20 minutes later, seated in a corner of the coffee shop with a hot tea I couldn't really afford, I listened as James Harrington explained why he had been searching for me. Eleanor Blackwood passed away 6 weeks ago at the age of 93. In her will, she left her entire estate to you, Rebecca Jean Mitchell, born May 12, 1980, to Margaret Mitchell, née Wilson, and Robert Mitchell of Evanston, Illinois. I stared at him. This has to be a mistake. I don't know any Eleanor Blackwood. Nevertheless, she knew you. Or of you, at least. The will is quite specific. He slid a document across the table. Her estate consists of liquid assets valued at approximately $47 million, real estate holdings including her primary residence in Oakwood Heights valued at $12 million, and various personal items and investments. As her sole heir, it all passes to you. I laughed, the sound catching painfully in my infected lungs. This is either a mistake or an elaborate scam. Why would a woman I've never heard of leave me millions? Mrs. Blackwood was eccentric, Harrington said carefully. She was the widow of Thomas Blackwood, founder of Blackwood Technologies. They had no children. Her will was updated 2 months before her death, with very specific instructions regarding you. What instructions? That you be located, that the inheritance be transferred with minimal publicity, and that you be given this. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in shaky handwriting. She also left a letter for me explaining that this bequest was, in her words, to right a wrong that can never truly be repaired. I turned the envelope over in my hands. I still don't understand. This can't be real. I assure you, it's quite real. If you're willing, I can take you to my office now to review the documentation. Or, if you prefer, we can meet tomorrow after you've had time to process this information. I looked at my reflection in the darkened window of the coffee shop, hollow-eyed, too thin, hair unwashed. I was wearing the same clothes I'd worn for 3 days. I had nowhere to sleep tonight except my freezing car. Now, I said. Let's go now. Harrington's office occupied half a floor in a Michigan Avenue high-rise, with views of the lake and the kind of understated luxury that whispered old money. I sat in a conference room, surrounded by legal documents, as 3 different attorneys verified the authenticity of Eleanor Blackwood's will. They showed me the document with my full name, birth date, parents' names, even the hospital where I was born. They confirmed that Eleanor had been of sound mind when she signed it, that there were no other claimants to her estate, and that the transfer of assets could begin immediately. There's just one condition, Harrington said, reviewing the paperwork. You must take up residence in Mrs. Blackwood's home in Oakwood Heights within 30 days of accepting the inheritance. You must maintain it as your primary residence for at least 1 year. That's it? Just live in a mansion? I asked, still unable to process what was happening. That's it. The property has been maintained by a skeleton staff since Mrs. Blackwood's hospitalization 3 months ago. They've been retained for the next year, their salaries already arranged. When can when would I move in? Tonight, if you wish. I have the keys here. Harrington slid a ring of keys across the conference table. The staff has been notified to expect you. Once you've established residence, we can begin the process of transferring the financial assets to accounts in your name. I picked up the keys, their weight substantial in my palm. And if this is all some kind of mistake? If she meant someone else? The will is explicitly clear, Ms. Mitchell. Eleanor Blackwood intended her estate to pass to you. The only question is whether you accept it. In the bathroom of Harrington's law firm, I opened the sealed envelope Eleanor had left for me. Inside was a single sheet of heavy stationery with just a few lines written in the same shaky handwriting. Rebecca. You don't know me, but I knew your grandmother Catherine. This inheritance cannot undo the past, but perhaps it can help secure your future. The house contains answers to questions you may not even know to ask. Eleanor Blackwood. My grandmother Catherine had died when I was 5. I had few memories of her, a floral scent, gentle hands, a quiet voice. My mother rarely spoke of her own mother, and when she did, a sadness seemed to enter her voice. I knew Catherine had been unwell for much of her adult life, but details beyond that were scarce. That night, I drove my Honda through the gates of Oakwood Heights, one of Chicago's most exclusive enclaves. Eleanor's house, my house now, apparently, stood at the end of a winding drive, a sprawling stone mansion built in the 1920s. A middle-aged woman in a housekeeper's uniform met me at the door. Ms. Mitchell, she said with a small nod. I'm Mrs. Winters, the head of household staff. We've prepared the blue suite for you, but all rooms are available for your use, of course. Would you like dinner served? I stood in the marble foyer, still wearing my unwashed clothes, holding a plastic bag from Walgreens containing my antibiotics and cough medicine. No, thank you. I think I just need to get settled. Mrs. Winters showed me to the blue suite, a bedroom larger than my entire former apartment, with an attached sitting room and bathroom featuring a shower with 8 different water jets. She explained the house phone system, meal times, and staff schedules with the efficiency of someone who had managed wealthy households for decades. When she left, I sat on the edge of the massive 4-poster bed, afraid to touch anything with my unwashed hands. The room was heated to a perfect temperature. Outside the window, snow was beginning to fall. Despite the luxurious bedroom, that first night I slept on the floor, wrapped in a throw blanket from a chair. The bed felt too exposed, too soft after months in my car. I kept waiting for someone to burst in and tell me it had all been a terrible mistake, that I needed to leave immediately. In the morning, I woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was. Then the reality crashed back. I was in a mansion I'd inherited from a woman I'd never met, with millions of dollars apparently coming my way, while my daughter remained with her father across town, unaware that her homeless mother had suddenly become wealthy. As I showered in the palatial bathroom, hot water easing the ache in my pneumonia-ravaged lungs, one thought kept circling: what connection could possibly exist between Eleanor Blackwood and my family? And why would she leave her fortune to a stranger? I have to pause here and say how surreal that first morning felt. Going from sleeping in my car to waking up in a mansion that was somehow mine. I never could have imagined where this inheritance would lead or the decades-old family secrets I was about to uncover. I'm curious, would you have immediately trusted this inheritance or been suspicious like I was? Let me know in the comments below. If you're finding this story valuable, please consider subscribing to hear what happens next, as I discover the shocking connection between Eleanor Blackwood and my family. After a week at Eleanor's mansion, I still couldn't think of it as mine. I began to explore beyond the few rooms I'd been using. The house was enormous, with 6 bedrooms, a library, formal living and dining rooms, a conservatory, and a basement level with a wine cellar and what had once been servants' quarters. Every room contained evidence of Eleanor's long life: photographs, artwork, collections of antique silver and crystal, books spanning decades. The library became my starting point. Floor-to-ceiling shelves housed thousands of volumes, from first editions to modern paperbacks. A large desk dominated one end of the room, its surface clear except for a leather blotter and an antique lamp. The desk's drawers contained stationery, pens, and office supplies, all meticulously organized. It was behind the desk, in a small cabinet built into the wall, that I found Eleanor's journals, dozens of leather-bound volumes dating back to the 1950s. I hesitated before opening them, feeling like an intruder despite legally owning everything in the house. But Eleanor's note had said the house contained answers, and I desperately needed to understand why she had chosen me. I began with the most recent journal, from the year before her death. Eleanor's handwriting was shaky but legible, the entries sporadic rather than daily. April 15, 2023. The Parkinson's is worse today. Dr. Levine wants to adjust my medication again, but what's the point? At 93, I'm living on borrowed time. My only regret is that I've waited so long to make amends. The private investigator finally located Catherine's granddaughter, living in her car, of all things. The cruelty of it feels like divine retribution. Thomas's theft destroyed Catherine, and now her granddaughter suffers while we lived with unearned wealth for decades. I've spoken with James about changing my will. It's not enough, it can never be enough, but perhaps it can break the cycle of injustice. I stared at the page, my heart racing. Catherine, my grandmother. Thomas, Eleanor's husband. Theft. I turned back through the journal, finding scattered references to her decision to change her will, her declining health, and her lifetime of complicity. Working backward through the journals, I began to piece together a story that spanned decades. Thomas Blackwood, Eleanor's husband, had founded Blackwood Technologies in the early 1970s. The company's breakthrough product, an operating system for early personal computers, had made them wealthy beyond imagination. Thomas had died in 1998, leaving everything to Eleanor. But according to her journals, the technology that built their fortune hadn't been Thomas's creation at all. June 12, 1978. Catherine Wilson showed Thomas her algorithm today. I've never seen him so excited. He said it could revolutionize how computers process information. Catherine trusts him completely, she has no idea he's already speaking with the lawyers about patents. I should say something. I know I should. But what would happen to us if I did? August 3, 1978. Thomas filed for the patent today, listing himself as the sole inventor. When I confronted him, he became enraged, saying Catherine was just a programmer at the company, working under his direction. He said her contract gives ownership of all her work to Blackwood Technologies. When I suggested he at least credit her as co-inventor, he reminded me that everything we have, our home, our status, our future, depends on Blackwood Technologies succeeding. Do you want to go back to living in an apartment in Rogers Park? He asked. God help me, I stayed silent. October 19, 1978. Catherine came to the house today, distraught. Thomas denied everything, told her she was confused, that the algorithm had been his concept all along and she had only helped implement his ideas. He had the paperwork to prove it. Contracts she'd signed when joining the company, apparently without reading the fine print. When she became hysterical, Thomas called her supervisor at the company and said she'd been acting erratically for weeks. By the time she left, Catherine was doubting herself. The look in her eyes will haunt me forever. I sat on the library floor surrounded by open journals, sick with the realization. My grandmother Catherine Wilson, my mother's maiden name, had created the algorithm that launched Blackwood Technologies. Thomas Blackwood had stolen her work, gaslighted her into doubting herself, and built a tech empire on her innovation. The later journals documented the aftermath. Catherine had suffered a breakdown, lost her job at Blackwood Technologies, and been institutionalized several times over the following years. She never worked in technology again. Her marriage to my grandfather fell apart under the strain. She died in 1985 when I was 5 years old, officially from heart failure, but Eleanor's journal suggested it was more accurately from a broken spirit. February 18, 1985. Catherine Wilson died yesterday. Robert called to tell us, his voice hollow with old grief. He said she never recovered from what happened in '78. She became someone else, paranoid, depressed, convinced that powerful forces were aligned against her. The doctors called it delusional, prescribed medications that turned her into a shell of herself. But she wasn't delusional. Every fear she had was justified. We did this to her. Thomas refuses to acknowledge any connection, says she was always unstable. but I know the truth. I'll carry it to my grave. And she had, almost. In her final years, as her own health failed, Eleanor's guilt had apparently become unbearable. Her last journals were filled with attempts to make amends. She had hired private investigators to track down Catherine's family, discovering that Catherine's daughter, my mother, Margaret, had married and had one child, me. The final piece fell into place when I found a newspaper clipping from 2 years earlier. Chicago executives' bitter divorce battle continues. The article detailed my fight with Daniel, including his accusations about my mental state and the custody battle for Lily. Eleanor had recognized the pattern, another powerful man destroying a woman's life by questioning her sanity and taking her child. In a drawer of the bedside table in what had been Eleanor's room, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it, a full confession letter she'd written months before her death. Rebecca. By the time you read this, I will be gone. I cannot leave this world without confessing the truth and attempting, however inadequately, to right a terrible wrong. In 1978, your grandmother Catherine Wilson created an algorithm that revolutionized computer processing. My husband, Thomas Blackwood, stole her work, patented it under his name, and built Blackwood Technologies on her innovation. When she challenged him, he used his power and influence to discredit her, portraying her as mentally unstable and delusional. The gaslighting and betrayal destroyed her. She spent her remaining years in and out of institutions, her brilliant mind clouded by medications and despair. I was complicit in this theft through my silence. I watched it happen and did nothing to stop it. The wealth and privilege I have enjoyed for decades was built on the destruction of your grandmother's life and career. Recently, I learned of your situation, how your ex-husband has used similar tactics to separate you from your child and destroy your reputation. The pattern is horrifyingly familiar. No inheritance can undo the damage done to Catherine or to you. But perhaps it can give you the resources to fight back and rebuild your life. The fortune I am leaving you rightfully should have been your family's all along. I can only hope that in some small way, this action begins to balance the scales of justice. With deepest regret and sincere apology. Eleanor Blackwood. I sat on Eleanor's bed, now my bed, clutching the letter, tears streaming down my face. The parallels were undeniable. Both Catherine and I had trusted men who betrayed us. Both had been labeled unstable when we challenged them. Both had lost everything as a result. But there was one crucial difference: Eleanor had given me the means to fight back. The next day, I visited my mother at Lakeview Care Center, where she had lived since her early onset Alzheimer's had progressed beyond my father's ability to care for her at home. Before the divorce, I had visited weekly. In the months of homelessness, I had managed only a few brief visits, ashamed of my appearance and situation. Now I sat beside her bed, her hand in mine, trying to navigate a conversation through the fog of her dementia. "Mom, do you remember Grandma Catherine?" I asked gently. Most days, my mother struggled to recognize me, but occasionally clarity would break through. Today seemed to be one of those days. "Catherine," she repeated, her eyes focusing briefly. "She was so sad. Always so sad. Do you remember why she was sad?" My mother's gaze drifted to the window. "They took her ideas. Her numbers. They said she imagined it all." "Who took them, Mom? Was it Thomas Blackwood?" At the name, my mother's hand tightened around mine. "Bad man." Eleanor knew. She promised to make it right someday. She turned to me suddenly, her eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. "Did she? Did Eleanor make it right?" I squeezed her hand, tears threatening again. "Yes, Mom. She did. She made it right." The clarity faded as quickly as it had come, but it was enough to confirm what I'd learned from Eleanor's journals. My mother had known the truth all along but had been powerless to fight against a wealthy, influential family like the Blackwoods. As I drove back to Eleanor's mansion, my mansion, I felt a strange sense of both closure and beginning. The inheritance wasn't random chance or mistaken identity. It was restoration. The fortune that should have been my grandmother's, that might have changed my mother's life and my own childhood, had finally returned to our family. And with it came the power to reclaim what Daniel had taken from me. News travels quickly in Chicago's elite circles. Despite James Harrington's efforts to handle the inheritance transfer discreetly, the change in ownership of Eleanor Blackwood's Oakwood Heights mansion couldn't be kept completely quiet. Property records were updated, staff were informed, neighbors noticed my presence. Within 2 weeks of moving in, the Chicago Tribune ran a small item in the business section: Blackwood widow leaves fortune to unknown heir. The article mentioned only that Eleanor had left her estate, valued at approximately $60 million, to a previously unknown beneficiary who had taken residence in the Oakwood Heights property. My name wasn't published, but it didn't need to be. Among the city's wealthy, information was currency. 3 days after the article appeared, Daniel called me for the first time since the divorce. "Rebecca," he said, his voice honey smooth, the way it always was when he wanted something. "I've been worried about you." "Have you?" I replied, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "That's fascinating, considering you're the reason I was living in my car with pneumonia last month." A pause. I had no idea things had gotten so difficult for you." "I'm truly sorry to hear that. This is exactly why I'm calling. We should talk about how to move forward in a more productive way. For Lily's sake." "What exactly did you have in mind?" "Dinner. Just the two of us. The Marchesi room at Vittorio's. Tomorrow at 7? We can discuss a new arrangement that works better for everyone." The Marchesi room was the most exclusive private dining room in Chicago's most expensive restaurant. It was where Daniel had proposed to me, where we'd celebrated his biggest deals, where he'd taken his most important clients. It was a power move designed to remind me of our former life together. "I'll meet you at Peterson's Cafe on Wilson instead. 6 o'clock. The modest cafe was in a working-class neighborhood far from Daniel's usual haunts. Now it was my turn for a power move. "Rebecca, be reasonable. That's hardly the appropriate venue for Peterson's at 6, or not at all. Your choice." The next evening, I arrived at Peterson's 10 minutes early, choosing a booth with clear sightlines to both the door and the kitchen's exit. I wore a simple black dress purchased the day before, not designer, but well-cut and appropriate for a business meeting, which was exactly how I viewed this encounter. Daniel arrived precisely at 6, his distaste for the surroundings evident in his expression as he scanned the vinyl booths and laminate tables. He wore a bespoke suit that probably cost more than most of the cafe's patrons earned in a month. Heads turned as he made his way to my booth. Daniel had always commanded attention. "You're looking well," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Better than I expected, given what you've been through." "What I've been through," I repeated flatly. "You mean what you put me through." He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. "The divorce was difficult for everyone. But that's the past. I'm here to talk about the future." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I know about the Blackwood inheritance, Rebecca. Congratulations. It's quite the windfall." Of course he knew. In Daniel's world, there were no secrets about money. "Thank you. It's been life-changing. I can imagine. From homeless to multimillionaire overnight. It's like a fairy tale." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Here's what I'm thinking: this development creates an opportunity for us to reconsider our situation. Specifically, regarding Lily." "I'm listening." "With your new financial stability, the courts would certainly view your ability to provide for Lily differently. I'm prepared to adjust our custody arrangement voluntarily: joint custody, flexible scheduling, no more supervised visits. We can make this work like civilized co-parents." I studied him, this man I'd once loved, once trusted. "That's surprisingly generous of you, Daniel. What changed?" "Seeing you struggle has been difficult. I never wanted things to go as far as they did. The lawyers, the court battles, it all took on a life of its own. Now we have a chance to start fresh, put Lily's needs first. The waitress approached to take our order. Daniel asked for a coffee, while I ordered a slice of apple pie. When she left, I leaned back in the booth. Let me make sure I understand. You're offering to renegotiate custody now that I have money. You're willing to acknowledge I'm a fit mother, now that I live in a mansion instead of a car. Daniel's expression hardened slightly. That's an uncharitable interpretation. I'm recognizing that your circumstances have changed significantly. The stability concerns that influenced the court's decision no longer apply. The stability concerns you fabricated to take my daughter away, I corrected him. The allegations about my mental state that you and your lawyers invented. The character assassination you orchestrated. Rebecca, we both said and did things during the divorce that we regret. I'm offering an olive branch here. I took a bite of the pie that had arrived, savoring the tart sweetness. No, Daniel. You're not offering an olive branch. You're making a play for my money. His smile vanished. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. Caldwell Properties is in trouble. The riverfront development is stalled because you can't secure financing. Your father's poor investments in crypto have drained the family reserves. You need capital, and you think my inheritance is the solution. The flash of surprise in his eyes confirmed my guess. James Harrington had mentioned these rumors when I'd asked him to investigate the current state of the Caldwell finances. Daniel recovered quickly. That's absurd. The company is stronger than ever. But as Lily's father, I do have a responsibility to ensure that any substantial change in either of our financial situations is properly reflected in our divorce agreement. Community property considerations may apply. And there it was, the real reason for this meeting. Not joint custody, not concern for my welfare, but an attempt to claim a portion of Eleanor's fortune. Illinois is not a community property state, as your own lawyers emphasized repeatedly during our divorce. And I received this inheritance after our marriage was legally dissolved. It has nothing to do with you. Daniel's facade of friendliness dissolved. We'll see about that. My attorneys believe there may be grounds to reopen the financial settlement based on evidence that you were aware of this potential inheritance during our marriage. I laughed, genuinely amused. That would be quite a trick, considering I didn't know Eleanor Blackwood existed until a month ago. But please, waste your money on legal fees. I have plenty to spend on my own defense now. This isn't over, Rebecca. That money should benefit our daughter, not just you. I agree completely. That's why I've already established a trust for Lily's education and future. But you won't control it, and you won't see a penny of it personally. I stood up, placing money on the table for our order. I have a meeting with my new attorney tomorrow to file for a custody modification based on my changed circumstances. I suggest you prepare yourself. Daniel's face darkened. You're making a mistake. The Caldwells don't lose, Rebecca. You should know that by now. Neither did the Blackwoods, I replied. Until they did. 2 days later, a courier delivered papers informing me that Daniel had filed an emergency motion claiming my inheritance should be considered marital assets concealed during divorce proceedings. His lawyers argued that the suspicious timing of the bequest suggested I had hidden a relationship with Eleanor Blackwood during our marriage. James Harrington referred me to Victoria Reynolds, one of Chicago's most formidable divorce attorneys. Victoria's reputation was fearsome. She had an uncanny ability to uncover hidden assets and a courtroom presence that intimidated even the most experienced judges. Her fees were astronomical, but for the first time in my life, money was no object. Victoria's first move wasn't defensive but offensive. Rather than simply responding to Daniel's motion, she launched a full investigation into the Caldwell finances, focusing particularly on discrepancies in the financial disclosures Daniel had made during our divorce. If he wants to claim you hid assets, Victoria said during our first strategy session, we'll show the court who was really hiding things. I have forensic accountants reviewing everything he submitted. We're also deposing his former assistant Veronica, who seems surprisingly willing to talk now that she's been replaced by a newer model. Within 3 weeks, Victoria's team had uncovered evidence that Daniel had maintained several offshore accounts not disclosed during our divorce. These accounts contained approximately $8 million that should have been considered marital property. Furthermore, they found emails proving Daniel had been transferring assets to these accounts in the months before he confronted me about the affair, suggesting he had been planning the divorce and hiding assets well in advance. Most damning of all, Victoria discovered financial transfers from a Caldwell subsidiary to Judge Gordon, who had presided over our divorce and custody hearings. The payments, disguised as consulting fees, had begun shortly before our case was assigned to Gordon and continued for several months after the final judgment. "This is judicial misconduct of the highest order," Victoria said, reviewing the evidence. "Criminal charges will likely follow. But first, we're going to destroy Daniel's attempt to claim your inheritance." The hearing on Daniel's emergency motion was scheduled before Judge Amelia Richardson, a newly appointed jurist with a reputation for meticulous attention to detail and zero tolerance for legal games. The courtroom was packed, partly with lawyers and clerks, but also with reporters. The story had leaked to the press: tech heiress fortune disputed in high society divorce battle. Daniel arrived with Edward Barnes and 2 junior attorneys, projecting his usual confidence. I sat beside Victoria, feeling strangely calm. For the first time since our divorce began, I was facing Daniel as an equal, not as a desperate woman fighting from a position of weakness. Judge Richardson began by reviewing Daniel's motion, her expression increasingly skeptical as Barnes presented their argument that I must have known about the inheritance during our marriage. "Your Honor," Barnes concluded, "the timing and magnitude of this bequest strain credibility." "Mrs. Caldwell." "Ms. Mitchell," I corrected quietly. Ms. Mitchell must have had an established relationship with Eleanor Blackwood prior to her death. "We believe this constitutes a deliberate concealment of assets that should have been considered in the original divorce settlement." Judge Richardson turned to Victoria. "Ms. Reynolds, your response?" Victoria stood, composed and commanding. "Your Honor, not only is Mr. Caldwell's motion entirely without merit, but it represents a continuation of the financial misconduct and abusive process that characterized the original divorce proceedings." She methodically presented evidence that I had never met Eleanor Blackwood, including affidavits from Eleanor's staff confirming she had never mentioned me before hiring the private investigator. She introduced Eleanor's confession letter explaining the true reason for the inheritance. Most devastatingly, she presented the evidence of Daniel's hidden offshore accounts and the payments to Judge Gordon. "Your Honor," Victoria concluded, "far from Ms. Mitchell concealing assets, it was Mr. Caldwell who systematically hid millions of dollars from the court while apparently purchasing a favorable judgment through payments to Judge Gordon. We are formally requesting that the original divorce settlement be vacated on grounds of fraud upon the court, and that Mr. Caldwell be referred for criminal investigation." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Richardson's gavel restored order. "Mr. Barnes, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Edward Barnes looked genuinely blindsided. He requested a brief recess to confer with his client, during which I saw them engaged in heated whispers. When court resumed, Barnes's demeanor had changed dramatically. "Your Honor, in light of new information, my client wishes to withdraw his motion regarding Ms. Mitchell's inheritance." Judge Richardson wasn't satisfied. "That's not sufficient, Counselor. Ms. Reynolds has made serious allegations of judicial misconduct and fraud. I expect a substantive response." Barnes looked uncomfortable. "We deny any impropriety in the strongest terms, Your Honor. The payments to Judge Gordon were legitimate consulting fees unrelated to this case." "Consulting on what exactly?" Judge Richardson asked. "Real estate matters, Your Honor. Judge Gordon has expertise in property development from his time in private practice." Victoria rose again. "Your Honor, we have evidence that these payments began the day after the Caldwell case was assigned to Judge Gordon's docket and ceased 1 month after the final judgment. The timing alone suggests a quid pro quo arrangement." Judge Richardson studied the documents before her, her expression grave. "I find Mr. Caldwell's motion regarding Ms. Mitchell's inheritance to be without merit and dismiss it accordingly." Furthermore, I am referring the evidence of potential judicial misconduct to the Judicial Inquiry Board and the potential financial fraud to the state's attorney's office for investigation. She turned her gaze directly to Daniel. Mr. Caldwell, the court takes a very dim view of attempts to manipulate the judicial system. Should these allegations prove true, the consequences will be severe. This hearing is adjourned. As we left the courtroom, reporters crowded around us. Victoria fielded their questions with practiced skill while I maintained composed silence. Through the crush of people, I caught Daniel's eye. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. Outside on the courthouse steps, he approached me, away from the cameras. "You've made a powerful enemy today," he said, his voice low and tense. "This isn't over, Rebecca." "Not by a long shot." I regarded him calmly, seeing him clearly perhaps for the first time. Not the charming, confident man I had married, but a bully who had finally encountered someone he couldn't intimidate or control. "You're right about one thing, Daniel. This isn't over. I'm just getting started." Within weeks of the courthouse confrontation, my life transformed in ways I could never have imagined during those dark days living in my car. With Eleanor's inheritance officially secured and Daniel's attempt to claim it thoroughly defeated, I began to rebuild not just my own life, but something larger and more meaningful. The first step was establishing the Rebecca Mitchell Foundation, dedicated to supporting women rebuilding their lives after divorce, particularly those involved in high-conflict custody battles. I hired a team of experienced nonprofit professionals to develop programs providing legal assistance, housing support, career counseling, and mental health services to women who found themselves in situations similar to mine. The foundation isn't just about financial help, I explained to James Harrington, who had agreed to serve on our board. It's about breaking the isolation these women feel, letting them know they're not crazy, and they're not alone. Parallel to the foundation's work, Victoria Reynolds and her team continued building a legal case for modifying my custody arrangement with Lily. The evidence of Daniel's financial fraud during our divorce provided strong grounds for revisiting not just the financial settlement, but the custody determination as well. Judge Gordon's bias was clearly influenced by Daniel's payments, Victoria explained. That alone could be sufficient for a review. But we're building a more comprehensive case focused on Lily's best interests now that your circumstances have stabilized. The investigation into Daniel's finances had uncovered more than just the offshore accounts and payments to Judge Gordon. Victoria's forensic accountants discovered a pattern of questionable business practices at Caldwell Properties, including inflated valuations, misrepresented investor documents, and potential tax evasion. "The Caldwells have operated for decades as if the rules don't apply to them," Victoria said, reviewing the mounting evidence. "That's about to change." Most surprising was the contact I received from Melissa Parker, my former friend whose false testimony had been so damaging during the divorce. She called me one evening, her voice hesitant and strained. "Rebecca, I don't know if you'll even speak to me, but I needed to call. I've seen the news about Daniel and the investigation. I can't live with what I did anymore." I sat in Eleanor's library, my library now, clutching the phone, memories of Melissa's betrayal still raw. "You lied about me under oath, Melissa. You helped him take my daughter." "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'll never forgive myself. But I need to tell you the truth. Daniel threatened us. He said Eric's company would be blacklisted from every development project in the city. We had just taken out a second mortgage for the twins' college funds. We would have lost everything. So instead, I lost everything." "Yes," she acknowledged. "I made the wrong choice. I'm prepared to sign an affidavit recanting my testimony and explaining the circumstances. It won't undo what happened, but maybe it can help you get Lily back." Melissa wasn't the only one coming forward. As Daniel's empire began to crumble under investigation, others found the courage to speak out. Veronica, the assistant he'd had an affair with, provided emails showing how Daniel had orchestrated the campaign to discredit me professionally and personally. Katie, my former assistant, admitted that Daniel had threatened to bankrupt her fledgling business if she hired me or provided references. The pieces were falling into place for a comprehensive legal case showing that Daniel had systematically isolated me, damaged my professional reputation, fabricated concerns about my stability, and corrupted the legal process to gain custody of Lily. Meanwhile, the investigations into Daniel's finances and the payments to Judge Gordon were advancing. The Judicial Inquiry Board suspended Gordon pending a full investigation, and the state's attorney's office convened a grand jury to consider criminal charges against both men. Victoria filed our motion for custody modification, presenting evidence of both my dramatically improved circumstances and Daniel's misconduct. The case was assigned to Judge Patricia Alamendi, known for her child-centered approach to custody determinations. The hearings stretched over several weeks, during which Daniel's carefully constructed facade continued to unravel. Former business associates testified about his volatile temper and ethical corners cut. Staff members from our household described his controlling behavior. Most telling was the testimony from Lily's therapist, Dr. Bennett, who had begun seeing my daughter for anxiety shortly after the divorce. Lily exhibits significant stress when discussing her father's expectations, Dr. Bennett testified. She describes feeling like she's walking on eggshells at home and expresses constant fear of disappointing him. By contrast, she speaks of her visits with her mother as the times she feels most free to be herself. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained my focus on one goal: creating stability and security for Lily. I had renovated a suite of rooms in the mansion specifically for her, with input from Dr. Bennett on creating a healing environment for a child who had experienced family trauma. Judge Alamendi conducted a private interview with Lily, then 8 years old, to ascertain her wishes without putting her in the position of choosing between parents in open court. While the contents of their conversation remained confidential, the judge's expression when she returned to the courtroom suggested my daughter had been candid about her experiences in Daniel's home. On a crisp October morning, almost exactly a year after I had been approached by James Harrington at the gas station, Judge Alamendi delivered her ruling. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony in this matter, the court finds that a substantial change in circumstances warrants modification of the existing custody arrangement. Primary physical custody of Lily Caldwell is hereby granted to Rebecca Mitchell, with Daniel Caldwell receiving standard visitation on alternating weekends and one evening per week. The judge addressed me directly. Ms. Mitchell, the court acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances that led to the original custody determination and recognizes the resilience you've demonstrated in rebuilding your life. Your commitment to providing a stable and nurturing home for your daughter is evident. Then she turned to Daniel. Mr. Caldwell, the evidence presented regarding your conduct during and after the divorce is deeply troubling. The court strongly recommends you engage in co-parenting counseling to address these issues for your daughter's well-being. That evening, I brought Lily home to Eleanor's mansion, our home now. Her eyes widened as she took in the grand entrance hall, the sweeping staircase, the gleaming wood and crystal. "Is this really where we live now, Mom?" she asked, her small hand gripping mine. "It is, sweetheart. Would you like to see your room? I designed it especially for you, but we can change anything you don't like." The suite I'd created included a bedroom with a window seat overlooking the gardens, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub she could fill with bubbles, and a small study with a desk for homework and art projects. The walls were painted the soft green she'd always loved, and I'd framed some of her artwork from our supervised visits. Lily turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It's perfect," she whispered. Then she looked up at me with serious eyes. "Are you going to explain now? About why everything changed?" I sat beside her on the window seat, considering how much of this complicated story an 8-year-old could understand. Some of it, yes. A lady named Eleanor left us this house because a long time ago, something unfair happened in our family. She wanted to make things right. And that's why Daddy is in trouble? Because of things that weren't fair? Even now, I was careful not to demonize Daniel. Whatever his flaws, he was still Lily's father. Your dad made some mistakes in how he handled our divorce. The judge decided you should live with me now, but you'll still see your dad regularly. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation for now. There would be time for more details as she grew older, for the full story of Catherine's stolen algorithm, Eleanor's decades of guilt, and Daniel's manipulation. For now, it was enough that we were together again. In the months that followed, I gradually reopened my design business, focusing particularly on hiring women in career transition. The experiences of homelessness and vulnerability had fundamentally changed my perspective on success and purpose. I found myself drawn to projects with social impact, affordable housing developments, community centers, spaces that brought beauty into the lives of people who had known struggle. The Rebecca Mitchell Foundation grew rapidly, establishing partnerships with legal aid organizations, domestic violence shelters, and workforce development programs across Chicago. We created a model that combined practical support with systemic advocacy, challenging the family court practices that often disadvantaged vulnerable women. With my newfound resources, I was able to move my mother to a specialized Alzheimer's care facility with innovative treatment approaches. Though her condition continued to progress, the quality of her care improved dramatically, and on her good days, she seemed to take comfort in knowing that Catherine's legacy had finally been acknowledged. The mansion itself gradually transformed from Eleanor's formal, somewhat austere home into a warm family residence that also served as foundation headquarters. The formal dining room became a conference space for board meetings and support groups. The conservatory hosted art therapy sessions for children affected by high-conflict divorce. The guest cottages on the property were renovated as transitional housing for women rebuilding their lives. Throughout this period of rebuilding, the legal consequences for Daniel continued to unfold. The grand jury indicted both him and Judge Gordon on multiple charges, including fraud, bribery, and corruption of the judicial process. Daniel's father Howard suffered a minor stroke upon learning of the indictment and stepped down from active management of Caldwell Properties. The company's stock plummeted as investors withdrew in response to the investigations and negative publicity. I took no pleasure in the Caldwell's downfall. Their actions had caused real harm, to me, to Lily, to countless others affected by their business practices, and accountability was necessary. But watching a once powerful family unravel held no satisfaction. I was focused entirely on building something new and healing from the past. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly 2 years after my life had changed so dramatically, I sat in Eleanor's garden, my garden now, watching Lily practice cartwheels on the lawn. Victoria Reynolds arrived for our scheduled meeting, a manila folder tucked under her arm and an unusual smile on her normally serious face. "I have news," she said, accepting the cup of tea I offered. "Daniel has accepted a plea deal. 5 years for fraud and witness tampering, with the possibility of parole after 3. He's been disbarred, of course. His father has negotiated a separate settlement with the SEC regarding the company's financial irregularities." I watched Lily, blissfully unaware of the adult complications unfolding around her, attempting a handstand against a tree. "How do you think this will affect her?" Victoria followed my gaze. "It will be difficult initially. But children are resilient, especially with proper support. The plea agreement includes provisions for supervised visitation during his incarceration if she wishes to see him. And if she doesn't? Then that's her choice, when she's old enough to make it. The agreement puts her well-being first." After Victoria left, I remained in the garden, reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. From interior designer to corporate wife to homeless mother to multimillionaire philanthropist, each identity had shaped me, taught me, brought me to this moment. In Eleanor's mansion, my mansion now, I had found not just shelter but purpose. In her journals, I had discovered not just the truth about my grandmother but wisdom about carrying the weight of difficult knowledge. In one of her final entries, Eleanor had written, "Wealth without conscience is poverty of the worst kind. The true measure of redemption is what you build from the wreckage of the past." Lily bounded over, flushed with exertion and pride. "Mom, did you see my cartwheel? It was perfect that time." I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of grass and sunshine in her hair. "I saw. It was absolutely perfect." In that moment, surrounded by Eleanor's roses, my roses now, with my daughter safe in my arms, I understood what Eleanor had meant. The inheritance wasn't just the money or the mansion. It was the chance to break cycles of injustice, to transform pain into purpose, to build something that would outlast any fortune. 1 year after Daniel's conviction, Lily and I had settled into a rhythm that once would have seemed impossible. Our mornings began with breakfast in the sunroom overlooking Eleanor's gardens, now bursting with new plantings alongside the heritage roses she had tended for decades. Lily attended a progressive school where her love of science and art was nurtured, and she had finally started making friends after the isolation of the Caldwell household. The mansion, once so intimidating, had become a true home, warm, lived in, filled with books and art projects and the occasional sleepover guest. The Rebecca Mitchell Foundation occupied the entire East Wing, with a staff of 12 dedicated to supporting women in transition. We had helped over 300 women navigate the aftermath of divorce, providing legal assistance, housing support, and career counseling. Our advocacy work had already influenced several reforms in family court procedures, and we were expanding to 3 additional cities in the coming year. On a perfect spring afternoon, Victoria arrived for our quarterly review meeting, bringing news that would close the final chapter of the Caldwell saga. "It's official," she said, accepting the glass of iced tea I offered as we settled in the garden. "Daniel's disbarment is permanent. The ethics committee cited a pattern of dishonesty and corruption that renders him permanently unfit to practice law. He'll serve his full 5-year sentence with no early parole due to continued unethical behavior while incarcerated." I nodded, absorbing the information with a calm that would have surprised my former self. "How is the family business faring?" "Caldwell Properties has been restructured under new management. Howard has retired completely following a second stroke. Most of their assets have been liquidated to pay settlements and fines. The Caldwell name has essentially been erased from Chicago's power circles." There was a time when this news would have felt like vindication, perhaps even victory. Now it simply felt like the necessary conclusion to a painful chapter. And Judge Gordon? 2 years suspended sentence and permanent removal from the bench. "The investigation revealed your case wasn't the only one where he accepted consulting fees. The Judicial Inquiry Board is reviewing all his decisions from the past 5 years." We discussed a few more legal matters before Victoria departed, leaving me alone with my thoughts in the garden. The foundation of justice I had built felt solid now, no longer dependent on Daniel's downfall but on the positive impact of our work. Later that afternoon, I found myself drawn to Eleanor's private study, a room I had preserved much as she had left it. Her journals remained organized chronologically on the bookshelves, a testament to her decades-long struggle with the truth she had hidden and her ultimate decision to make amends. I had read them all by now, tracing the arc of her life from young wife to reluctant accomplice to remorseful widow. In her final journal, she had written, "Wealth without conscience is poverty of the worst kind. I lived most of my life in such poverty, surrounded by luxury but hollowed out by guilt. Perhaps in giving Catherine's granddaughter what should have been her family's legacy, I can die with something resembling peace." I ran my fingers over her handwriting, feeling a connection to this woman I had never met but whose moral awakening had saved me from destitution. Eleanor's story was inextricably intertwined with mine now. Both of us had witnessed injustice, both had been complicit through silence, both had eventually found the courage to act. The sound of Lily's voice calling for me pulled me from my reflections. I found her in the main library, surrounded by old photograph albums she had discovered on a bottom shelf. "Mom, who are all these people?" she asked, pointing to a black and white photograph of a young woman in 1970s attire, standing proudly beside an early computer terminal. I sat beside her, recognizing my grandmother Catherine from the few photographs my mother had kept. "That's your great-grandmother Catherine. She was a brilliant computer programmer at a time when very few women worked in technology." "Like me," Lily exclaimed, referring to her newfound passion for coding classes at school. "What did she make?" I considered how to explain the complex history to a 9-year-old. "She created a special algorithm, a set of instructions that helped computers work better. It was very important and valuable." "Is that why we have this house? Because of her algorithm?" Children have an uncanny ability to connect dots adults think are well hidden. I nodded slowly. In a way, yes. It's a complicated story about justice and forgiveness. The woman who left us this house, Eleanor, wanted to make right something that had gone wrong a long time ago. Lily studied the photograph intently. She looks like you. And like me too, a little. Yes, I think so too. Would you like to know more about her? About our family history? Yes, Lily said decisively. All of it. Even the complicated parts. And so, sitting in Eleanor's library, our library now, surrounded by the books and photographs of generations past, I began to share the story of two women connected across decades by both injustice and redemption. I told Lily about Catherine's brilliant mind and innovative work, about Thomas Blackwood's theft and the fortune built on her ideas. I explained Eleanor's decades of silence and her final act of restitution. And then there's our chapter of the story, I said, holding my daughter's hand. How Daniel tried to take everything from us, just like Thomas took everything from Catherine. But unlike Catherine, we got a second chance to fight back. Because of Eleanor, Lily said thoughtfully. She changed everything. Yes, I agreed. One person's decision to do the right thing, even very late, can change everything. As I looked at my daughter's face, illuminated by understanding beyond her years, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us here. From the pinnacle of Chicago society to sleeping in my car to inheriting a fortune I never knew existed, each step had shaped me, broken me, rebuilt me. Rock bottom, it turned out, could be the foundation on which you build something unshakable. The Rebecca Mitchell Foundation would continue to grow, supporting women who had lost everything and needed a path back to stability and dignity. Lily would grow up knowing both the privileges of wealth and the responsibilities it carried. And I would continue to honor Eleanor's final wish, that Catherine's legacy, nearly erased from history, would finally receive the recognition it deserved. I've shared this story today because I believe there's power in knowing that rock bottom doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the foundation for something stronger and more meaningful than what came before. If my journey has resonated with you in any way, please consider sharing it with someone who might need hope right now. Have you ever experienced a moment of justice or redemption in your own life? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding unexpected second chances, please subscribe to this channel. Thank you for witnessing my journey from homeless to heiress, from victim to advocate. Remember that your lowest moment might just be the beginning of your greatest chapter.